If you don't address the individual pain points of the attendees, they will still leave hungry.
Welcome to No More Bad Events, a fun and insightful podcast for professional event organizers and for anyone at any level interested in producing nothing but the best events. Each week, we'll talk with legendary event professionals to get an inside look into what they think makes a great event. And in the process, we'll draw out insider secrets, non-traditional approaches, and compelling stories from the most captivating personalities in the business. No More Bad Events is produced and presented by eSpeakers, the most trusted online platform for the best keynote speakers in the world. And I'm your host, Scott Bloom, comedian, event MC, and now your podcast host. Let's get started. Hey folks, thanks so much for dropping by. We have a great guest on the show today, someone who I just met recently, but I've become a huge fan, and I have so much respect for him. I'm glad he came on the podcast, and we finally got a chance to address this topic. Now, we're purposely releasing this episode in May because, as some of you may know, May happens to be Mental Health Awareness Month. And I think you know where this episode is headed. That's right. Today's episode deals with mental health in the workplace, and more specifically, how mental health affects those of us in the events industry. And believe me, there's something here for everyone, including me. If you ever see my bio, you'll see I'm a self-taught student of psychology. I'm constantly searching for ways to understand the human condition, and that includes mental well-being, even my own. So this conversation is definitely in my wheelhouse. My guest today is Johnny Crowder, who is not just a mental health advocate and a highly successful mental health speaker, but a trailblazer in transforming corporate cultures and event programming with his refreshing approach to mental wellness. In today's discussion, Johnny shares his personal journey of battling mental health issues and how that challenge catapulted him into the speaking world, where he speaks about mental health and emotional well-being. He also addresses how the subject matter matters, no matter what category of conference is being developed. Actually, and to that point, Johnny has expanded his reach beyond typical health-focused audiences to address unseen pain points in various professional settings. So whether you're planning for an IT or a contractors conference or other, Johnny encourages event professionals to include mental health in their agendas to support the well-being of their attendees. He also strongly advises of consistency in messaging and interactive follow-ups that can make a lasting impact on mental health support. Things like the app he created called Cope Notes, or utilizing stress relievers like listening to calm down playlists. These are among Johnny's contributions to ongoing communications and daily exercises that will help keep mental health top of mind. So stay tuned as we unpack the layers to Johnny's approach and gain insights on making mental health a staple in event programming. It's a transformative conversation that promises insights, actionable takeaways, and a key for ensuring only the best events. That said, let's get into Johnny's mind right now and hear what he has to say about mental wellness and emotional well-being. I can't be the first person to say this, but you don't look like, and I've seen you on stage, as a traditional buttoned-up keynote speaker. How's your unique look and style been perceived by audiences and meeting planners, and has it helped or hurt you or both?
So for context, yesterday I did my first headshot photo shoot ever in my whole speaking career, where I was wearing not just a t-shirt, but a t-shirt underneath a blazer, which is just about as fancy as I've ever dressed. And it was specifically requested by my agent, and I was talking to him right before I got my neck tattooed. If you're listening online, you can't see me. I'm covered in tattoos. And I called my agent before I got my neck tattooed, and I said, can you tell me, like, if this is going to make your job really hard, let me know, because I don't want to screw you over. I don't want to make it harder for you to book me. And he said, Johnny, two things. First of all, my job is already hard. You're covered in tattoos. Like some groups already don't want to book you because you look like you do. So I'll tell you this, you getting your neck tattooed is not going to make or break how difficult it is to get you booked. But then he said, what's interesting is before we worked together, I was really nervous that groups wouldn't want to book you because of your appearance. And now I'm actually seeing requests come in for less conventional speakers, more casual, more personal, and having a different kind of look, a different style is actually an advantage to where now if someone is requesting a different type of speaker, you're the first one that comes to mind. So he's like, if anything, what I originally thought was going to be a weakness for you is now kind of a competitive advantage. So he's like, you might actually get more gigs. So go get your neck done and we'll see what happens.
Now, you said you're covered in tattoos. I don't know if this was the new one. I think it's an addition to the back of your neck, but you have a tattoo that says you matter on the back of your neck. You have tattooed on your knuckles, save them. How do your tattoos play into your personal and professional branding, especially in the context of your speaking engagements?
So two things come to mind. The first is I never have to think about having a conversation starter, like either before or after stage, because people come up to me and ask me questions about my tattoos. So it's kind of nice for people to feel like they have a point of connection even before they get to know me. And I enjoy talking about the art on my body. Everything has a story. But then I've also noticed that a lot of my tattoos tie into what I speak about on stage. So, for example, I have a giant gratitude checklist tattooed on my forearm. And I talk about how that has actually helped shape my perspective. It's shaped how I look at the world, things that I seek out. And now a lot of my tattoos are actually incorporated into my content where, let's say I'm giving a talk about compassion fatigue. And I say, you want to talk about compassion fatigue? Do you want to know that I know where you're coming from? My knuckles say, save them. My plan was to save the entire world. And so far it's taken a lot longer than I thought it would. It's like really connecting with people on the desire to serve others and how it can drain me. And I think there's a similar story like that for every tattoo on my body.
So I think part of your lifestyle is constantly reinforcing the positive. I mean, the tattoo of the 10 bars are almost like heavy metal rosary beads. You know, the reason you do the rosary beads is to connect back to it. It's constantly having reminders. And, just getting to know you briefly, I know you have a great sense of humor. I know humor and positivity are a significant aspect of your speaking style. How do you balance the seriousness of mental health topics to ensure your message is both impactful and accessible?
Yeah, this is something that I think is actually missing from a lot of mental health talks. So I've seen just about every mental health related TED talk. I've been to, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of different events where I've seen keynote speakers talk about mental health on stage. The one missing ingredient that I see that causes a disconnect between the speaker and the audience is this kind of somber, sort of like Hollywood-esque darkness, where we, as speakers, when we're talking about challenges that we've gone through, sometimes we lean so heavily into the drama of the challenge and the hardship. We want people to smell our desperation and feel our pain. And we accidentally over leverage too much of our stage time on that challenge and not enough on what it means, on the solution, on what we did after that. And I find when I'm in the audience and I'm hearing somebody share about struggles, what I'm begging for is a release of tension, which is basically the definition of comedy, is the controlled release of tension. So when I'm on stage, I try to make no bones about the fact that my experience growing up, the trauma that I faced, the illness that I persevered through is no joke. However, the idea that I could say that there's nothing funny about counting my Cheerios because of OCD and not stepping on cracks and not being able to walk up and down stairs or sit near windows. I mean, talking about components of my psychosis, if I was talking about them when I was still in the middle of it, I don't know that I would find a ton of humor. But looking back, what I want to do is help that audience not be so afraid of engaging in the mental health conversation by inserting a little bit of humor and showing them like it's okay to have a human perspective of this challenge, not a Hollywood perspective of this challenge.
You're also taking off that veneer of trauma. You're putting it in perspective. You're seeing the light side of it. It's definitely happened. It's affected you, but you're growing from it. And I think one way is to not victimize yourself by living in that story. I think they always talk about that's real important. I'm sure they can relate to that as well. Reframing things.
I use this phrase a lot. I say the past is context, not content. So I'm not going to spend 60 minutes talking to you about what I've been through. I will have to spend a minute here and a minute there catching you up on the 32 years of challenges that you missed. But that's just to set the stage so that I can show you what I did in those circumstances to actually come out better for them. If I'm on stage, I'm spending less time talking about the challenge and more time talking about the solution.
Yes. And just being able to experience someone who's gone through that and see where they are now, that you seem very healthy, you seem together, you have a lightness about you, I think is an important message. And that's being conveyed almost on an unconscious level. You don't even have to say that. Now, you work with a lot of different organizations. How does mental health fit into programming for events that don't seem to have anything to do with mental health?
That's such a great question. For the first, maybe 7 years of me speaking publicly, every event I did was like a mental health focused event. It would be like Florida Behavioral Health Conference or the National Association for Mental Health Practitioners or something. It was always focused on mental and emotional health. And then maybe 2017, 18, 19, and especially now post-COVID, this wouldn't surprise anybody, but a few years before COVID, I started getting requests from realtors associations and financial planners associations. And I was just like, what the heck are they? Do they know that my main thing is mental health? And then when I would actually sit down and talk to the meeting planner and some of the organizers of the event, and I would ask them, I do my best to understand who I'm speaking for and what they're struggling with. And I am blown away by how many times I've had an organizer for an event tell me that the pain points of their audience, that their audience is hoping are going to be addressed at the event, are stress related, are self-care related, are work-life balance related, are company culture related, and all of these things, whether they would define those as mental health concerns or not, I know that they are because this is my domain. So I think, now I understand why you want a mental health speaker, because it almost doesn't even matter what type of event you're putting together. If you don't address the individual pain points of the attendees, they will still leave hungry. And that's not necessarily what you want. You put together this huge event, you have people fly in from all over. You want people leaving feeling full and equipped. And all of us have that opportunity to improve our mental and emotional health, even if we're a veterinarian or a dentist or something that doesn't quite line up with the traditional mental health umbrella.
And what was that shift like going from healthcare, mental health type programs, psychiatric programs, to general corporate events and associations like the realtors? Was there a shift in terms of language or how you positioned what you were going to be talking about?
Yeah, one of the things that I do, it's funny, they're actually very similar because I'm speaking to human beings, like in any audience. So there's lots of similarities between them. But one thing that I do when I'm speaking for groups that aren't mental health focused is let's say I'm in a roofing association or something like that. Or I just did actually last year, I'll use an example. I spoke at the Construction Industry Roundtable. So it's in DC, all these huge construction company leaders and CEOs and stuff. And there's some tough guys in there. And these are guys who get stuff done. These are builders. These are people who are doing multi-billion-dollar construction projects. And we get in this room, and one of the first things I ask is, do me a favor and raise your hand if either you or someone you know and care about has experienced depression, anxiety, stress, bipolar disorder, self-harm, addiction, anything related to mental health challenges. Just raise your hand.
Every hand came up,
you
right?
Or someone that you know. And yeah, literally every single hand in the room. And then I say, before you put your hands down, look around. Because I understand that you thought you were coming to a construction conference to learn only about construction. And let me tell you something, our conversation today over the next 55 minutes is directly related to your construction business being successful. And this is exactly why. It's people on your leadership team it's your staff, and it's you or your spouse or your son or daughter. And if those challenges are happening, I can guarantee you it's going to be way harder to be successful in business if there's this huge drain coming from some type of mental health need. So it's actually in your best interest and in your company's best interest that we address this now, here, while we're all in DC together. And it's cool to watch a shift, because for a mental health audience, I don't think you need to help contextualize how pervasive mental health is, but in a group of people who weren't going to a health conference, it's important to show them like, this is part of the human condition. Like all of us are facing something like this. And the longer we put it off, the harder whatever goal you came here trying to achieve will be to achieve.
Yeah, when you put it in that context, I think anyone who's listening is having a big aha moment right now. I mean, it seems so obvious that mental health is important in everything we do in our jobs and our work. There's lots of stressors, but you also put it in context that, hey, maybe if it's not you, someone around you. And that's going to affect your work-life balance. It's going to affect how you show up at work. And I know this is an area that, not just in your speaking, but you also founded a company called Cope Notes. And for people who aren't familiar with Cope Notes, from what I understand, it's a program where you're signing up for daily texts that have some positive and mental health related issues that you can think about or to move you forward. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Cope Notes?
Yeah, it's funny how Cope Notes directly ties into my speaking career. So a lot of people don't know this, but I was a public speaker way before Cope Notes existed. So I didn't create a company and then get booked because I was the CEO of a company. It was actually, I was speaking, and then when I would leave, so let's say I'm flying out, I'm speaking in Chicago or something, and then I'm about to fly home, and they say, what do you have for us? Like, do you have like a program that we can implement to reinforce all of the cultural suggestions that you made, or something to like help keep us accountable? And I was like, literally keynote after keynote, I'd be like, no. And then I'm like, well, maybe I should write a book. And then I'm like, man, I've seen companies buy books and then they just kind of collect dust. Like they're just on the company bookshelf. They're in the company library. You send them home with your employees and they're used as coasters. And I just kept thinking,
I'm using one as a coaster right now. I won't mention the author, but I'm using one right now. And I use my other speaker book as a counterbalance on my monitor. And I actually ran the speaker at the National Speakers Association. He was in the elevator. And I just impulsively shared that I'm using your book as a counterweight, which was probably the rudest thing I could have possibly said. But anyway, okay. So books don't really, you wanted to look for an alternative.
Well, yeah, the idea is, so I remember when I was really unwell, so let's rewind maybe 12 years. I was really not doing well in my late teens, my early 20s. I was very, very mentally and emotionally unhealthy. And I remember my girlfriend at the time gave me a book, and she encouraged me to read the book because she told me that it would help me feel better. When I tell you, I waited as long as humanly possible to crack this book. It lived in my backpack for ages, and I did not open it. It was like I kept it because I felt like I should, because my girlfriend gave it to me. I didn't want to crack it. There's this inbuilt unwillingness to address mental and emotional health challenges that you actually have to overcome every time I get on stage. That's part of me opening up the audience, is helping them address those issues. So when clients would ask me for a book, I'd think like, I don't even know if anybody would open a book if I gave it to you guys. How do I make a leave behind that actually cuts through the noise, almost like a book that reads a couple sentences of itself to you every day? Like, how do I take health education content, like things that I actually want to teach people, but almost make it unavoidable to where you have no choice but to carve out 15 seconds every day, once per day, at a random time to engage with some type of health education content. So really the original idea for Cope Notes was I would speak somewhere and leave, and they'd say, are you going to come back? Like, when are you going to give us a thing that helps reinforce everything? And I actually built it to accommodate that.
Oh, interesting. Because I know what you're trying to do is change neural pathways, have the same information come at you time and time again. And what you're talking about with consistency is not only just mental health, but anything that goes on at one of these conferences. A speaker comes in, and, it's very hard to change people's minds, change a culture in a 1-hour keynote. So the follow through is very important. I know there are a lot of keynotes that have programs that they implement, over a period of time where they'll come back. And, from a speaker's point of view, it's a great business model as well, but it also keeps on reinforcing the message. Do you have anything like that besides Cope Notes where you'll come back and do some workshops or come back with a whole different keynote or something to pull through in addition to the Cope Notes?
Yeah, I actually have a lot of fun returning to groups. So a lot of times what I'll leave with is, it depends on the size of the group. Like if it's a few thousand people, it can be really difficult to do some of the more interactive things. But if I'm speaking to a group of less than 600 people, we can actually do a few interactive things that are pretty fun. We're like pairing off people and actually having them. I'm not going to give away too many things, but one of the activities that I do with groups actually requires them to set time on the calendar with their partner for a future date to discuss topics that we're coming up with right there related to mental and emotional health. So there's like accountability built in. There's company culture strengthening and morale strengthening there. You're building trust with people in other departments. So it's like improving communication. And what I really like is coming back to do another talk. So let's say the first talk is about burnout prevention and dealing with compassion fatigue and all things related to self-care. And then the next talk I come back, I'm talking more about like broad company culture, internal communication, and coping with challenges that arise in the workplace, stuff like that. What's really cool is coming back the second time and having people tell me about their homework experiences. Like, oh, when we set aside that 30-minute call, it flew by and we actually had to set a 45-minute call next. And then we went to lunch and now we meet once a month to talk about what's going on in our lives. Like, part of it is making sure that there's a path to continue the conversation. And that's for the company's benefit, but I'll also say selfishly, there's a benefit in it for me, which is hearing the change that happens in people's lives as they actually stick with something past that one event.
I think that's great. And do some of these companies, I know you don't sell and promote Cope Notes on the stage, but is this something that you'll discuss with an organizer beforehand, saying, hey, this would be a great thing to keep on this follow through throughout the year?
Yeah, I try to be very careful. Like, I've been to a talk that felt like an infomercial. I've been to many of them and they are excruciating. I feel like I'm going to jump out of my skin. Mm-hmm. So I'm always very careful to talk to people beforehand. Like, listen, I am in the business of changing people's brains. Like, I am a professional brain changer. That's my entire job. The question is, to what degree is that appropriate from the stage? Like, how different do you want these brains to be? Because while I can make a huge cultural impact in that one moment from the stage, what I've heard people say is, I gave a keynote in Long Beach, California last year. Absolutely beautiful. And I got off stage and somebody told me that hearing about the science behind Cope Notes, like the randomly timed interruptions, changing thought patterns, like literally learning how and why the brain changes. My first TED Talk was specifically about like the neuroscience behind brain change, like what's physically happening in your brain as synapses are interacting with each other. And they said after that, they were like, I realize now why I haven't been able to stop drinking. And now I feel equipped to make that change in my life. And I'm going to stop drinking. And I'm going to look back and say, today was the day that I realized why and how my brain changes and how I can make that change moving forward. And she was crying. She was on the phone with her husband. It was so beautiful to see. So when I'm on stage, I'm primarily an educator and an equipper. I'm not a salesperson on stage. I want to teach people something they didn't know before and give people tools that they didn't have before. If it happens to be something that I invented, excellent. I'm happy. But if it's not that, I don't leave feeling like I've failed. I just care that someone's life is better because I was in their city.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's important for all of us to realize that we do have a platform there and that we can, as speakers, we can help people. And I think event professionals, when they're choosing their speakers, is this a speaker that's just going to have a big wow moment or something that they can take away with them years down the line, or something that even they can pull through all the way through the year is a good start, let alone 10 years from now. So you deal with a lot of diverse audiences. You mentioned that probably even more so post-pandemic. We all went through our I went through it. My whole business collapsed. So I dealt with a lot of anxiety and depression,
Jeez.
severe for the first time ever. And it was great because it gave me some empathy for what other people have gone through because I had never gone through that. We talked about stress, avoiding burnout, especially in these high pressure environment of event planning and execution. They have a really tough job. What are some of the things they can implement to make their job a little bit more manageable?
Oh man, I have so many. I will share two very brief ones. They're both like tactical things that you can employ right away. One is I am a huge fan of drawing a physical locus of control. So basically, you draw a circle like on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper, and you write down all of the variables that are within your locus of control. So, for example, did catering get booked? Did I make sure that all of the contracts were sent out on time? Like all the things that you could do. The things on the outside of the circle, you're writing things that you can't control. So, for example, did they return the signed contract back to me? I can't control whether or not they do that. So, drawing that really allows you to focus your time and energy on the only things that are inside of your control. Because I find that especially people who work in events, they feel a responsibility to the entire success of the event, even over things that are not within their locus of control. So it really helps you identify and focus on the things that you can influence directly. And the second thing that I'm a huge fan of, this takes no time at all. I do it passively, actually. I have a playlist on Spotify that I titled Calm Down. And it is a list of songs. You might already know this, but listening to 30 seconds of music can lower your blood pressure and heart rate. 30 seconds. This is extraordinarily fast acting. Like, you ever heard of like quick release tablet for like headache medication? Nothing is quicker release than 30 seconds. This is like very fast. So what I'll do is I have a calm down playlist and I add songs that make me forget things. Everybody has a few songs that if you put it on, they can't focus on anything else because the melody or the rhythm, something about that song soaks up all of their mental and emotional energy. And until that song stops playing, they can't focus on anything else. And so what I do is whenever I hear a song that is that for me, I add it to the playlist. And whenever I get really frustrated or stressed, I open up the playlist and I press shuffle and I just listen to one song, whatever pops up. And I'm telling you, these are two really simple things that I would say any planner could start implementing now and start seeing fruit from now.
I love both those ideas. And especially what resonated with me was the locus of control. Because as you said, as an event planner or any normal person who's got a business they're running, there's 8,000 different things. I have a little whiteboard. It's actually turquoise, but I have a little board that I write things because I need to see what my to-do list for the day. Otherwise I get scattered. But this idea of concentrating on what's important, what I have control over. Because a lot of times we're thinking about, I hope he or she signs that and sends it back, and that we have no control. So it will help to mitigate a lot of that kind of stress. We're talking about bringing mental health, taking away the stigma of mental health, having people talk about it a little bit more. You've tackled various myths surrounding mental health in what you do. Which of these myths do you find most prevalent in professional settings, and how do you address them in your talks?
The biggest myth around mental health is that it applies to everybody but me. Those other people need to hear it. And this keeps so many people, myself included for a long time, from healing. And so what I try to tell people is, even when I speak at schools, when I'm talking to like youth, I'm talking middle schoolers, I will say, if someone says, well, mental health isn't really my thing, like that doesn't really apply to me, I always say on stage in front of all these middle schoolers, even sometimes elementary, I say, yeah, that's why I don't brush my teeth. And they say, what? Ew. And I say, what? I don't need to brush my teeth. I don't have any cavities. And they'll yell to me, that's not how it works. You're supposed to brush your teeth. And I always tell people, like, the thing that's keeping you from being healthy is likely the idea that you are already so healthy that you don't need to hear what I have to say. You're standing in your own way. I always want to tell people that, the statistic you see online is, 2 out of 5 adults live with a mental health condition. I always tell people 5 out of 5 adults live with mental health. If you have a brain inside of your skull, this conversation applies to you. Don't waste this hour. You pay for that, not me. That's not fair.
Well, that's a great thing to start off with, even at one of your talks, because yes, everyone's going, even if it's someone that's close to them, it's their problem. It's not my problem. So I'm sure the first thing you need to do is get them open to receive this information that this can actually literally help them. And so in your experience, what are the key elements in creating a workplace culture that not only fosters mental wellness, but also a sense of belonging among employees? Because I'm sure that's top of mind for a lot of company management at this point.
Yeah, I would say the normalization of the conversation around mental health is really crucial. Like I mentioned, having year-round consistency, not just during Mental Health Awareness Month, but also, I think about this. Leaders have a tremendous opportunity. Every leader has a stage to share with their teams about what they're going through, and they don't. I routinely see people go through something really challenging and never open up even a peep about it to the people who look up to them. And I think about this one time, I had a family member who was in the hospital, and I was scared that they were going to pass away. Mm-hmm. And I had demos back to back. I was in big health insurance meetings with these big health insurance payers, working on big contracts, big opportunities. And at the end of this day, we had our weekend, Friday afternoon, all hands meeting with our team. And I get on the call, and one of my employees is seeing on my face that I'm just kind of going through something. And he was like, "Hey, Johnny, what's going on?" And I start crying, dude. I'm on a video call with all my employees. My whole company's there. And I start crying. I'm thinking, I am ruining my credibility with my team. I'm never going to bounce back from this. They're never going to respect me. And I just said, I have a family member in the hospital. I'm really nervous they're going to pass away. I feel like any moment I could get this call that someone I love dearly is no longer in my life. And I just can't, it's so hard to focus on work and on meetings and now to be here for you guys. And I'm sorry to unload. I just feel like so much pressure. And after that call, I'm not saying most of my employees, I said every single one of my employees sent me a message, either on email, on Slack, a text message saying, "I totally understand. I'm so glad you shared that. Please let me know if I can do anything. Please take time off if you need it." And since then, my relationships with all my employees have actually been better. And what I would encourage these companies to do culturally, specifically from top down, is lead by example and I'm not saying you have to cry your eyes out on a Zoom call. That certainly wasn't my go-to-market plan, but that happened. And I think people would be shocked to see that when leaders set the example by being open about what challenges they're facing, the transformation that takes place culturally as a result.
Yeah, we're seeing that more with executives on stage. Obviously, post-pandemic, everyone being a little bit more authentic, sharing a little bit more of themselves and their story. And everyone, I think, is more ready now. So I just think in general, people are shifting. Now, you must have gone through some changes from when you were a kid to you started speaking. Now you're speaking all the time professionally. You're always in demand. How is your sharing your personal journey and expertise in mental health through all the public speaking engagements that you do? How has that impacted your own well-being and your own recovery process?
I will never say that there's not a cost. Telling the truth costs you something, but it costs you way less than not telling the truth. So you have to pay a fee either way. I look at one time I went on a date with this girl, and it went super well. We hit it off. She had a great sense of humor. We both really liked music, so we connected on the artistic side. And then we went on 3 or 4 more dates. Everything was going super well. And I was like, wow, this might actually turn into a real relationship. On the 5th date, we show up for dinner, and she's different. From the moment we sit down, I'm like, what is the vibe shift? And she said, "I Googled you." And I was like, oh no, it's over. She's like, "Yeah, I read all about you tried to die by suicide. You've been abused growing up, so much baggage. I can't believe how much stuff and you're out there talking about your dirty laundry with the whole world. That's just way too much information." I thought, if that's the price that I pay to feel literally invincible in my life, totally worth it. Because that's the truth. Anybody can Google any of my deepest, darkest secrets, of my most vulnerable moments. It's all findable on YouTube. And you can find this stuff out about me, but I'll walk around with no secrets. And I can't explain to you how freeing, how liberating it is for me to walk into any room knowing full well that there's nothing these people could discover about me that will undo me because I've already told them. It has actually allowed me to own and celebrate my recovery in a way that I couldn't if I was trying to hide it.
If there was one thing to take away from our talk today for, the event professionals that are listening to it, not just from a mental health, but why it's important now to implement or incorporate maybe a mental health speaker at an event, allay some of their fears that they might have right now of doing that, and tell them why this would be a huge benefit, not only for the company, but the people looking at you to, even a speaker bureau to look at you and go, hey, you're doing something a little bit different. You're having a big impact on our audience.
I think that probably any planner that I've worked with in the past, the word that they've used to describe the atmosphere in the room, the words that I hear are typically like pleasantly surprised or relieved. They actually they come into it with kind of a doubt, like, well, we'll see how a mental health session is going to go at a structural engineering conference. And the audience is pleasantly surprised that it's being addressed in programming, and the planner is actually relieved. They're like, thank God. And afterwards, the feedback that they get is actually the coverage of behavioral health in the programming was not expected, but it was hoped for. It was needed, even though it wasn't asked for. So whenever I think about when I worked at a creative agency, I would always want to give the client something additional that they didn't ask for, but that I knew they needed. And that's the position that I think meeting planners are in, is people might be asking you for an entree. But if you come in with an appetizer and dessert and a mint with their check, if you come in with all this extra stuff, they'll leave and go, wow, I'm going to remember that dinner. I think that's the real opportunity for planners is giving people what they need and what they want, even if it wasn't requested directly.
I think that's excellent advice. We got to wrap things up. This has been a great conversation. Johnny, you definitely matter. You matter, whether I see it on the back of your neck or I'm just looking at you. I hope people who have listened to this realize how important mental health is. As I said, we're going to probably drop this in May. So you're in that flow, folks. So take what Johnny has to say, see if you can implement some of those things. Thank you again, Johnny, for spending time with us here. I appreciate everything you do and everything you had to say.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for now. Thanks once again to eSpeakers, the #1 way to find your next perfect speaker. With the deepest catalog of professionals available, you can be assured that the speaker you book will be the absolute best speaker based on your goals, bar none. I've been your host, Scott Bloom, corporate event MC and comedic keynote speaker. And of course, your connoisseur of connections. Oh, by the way, and if you're interested, you can book me for your next event on eSpeakers Marketplace at eSpeakers.com/marketplace. And if you like what you heard, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you loved what you heard, drop us a review and don't forget to share with your friends. Thanks so much for listening. Now go out and make your event a great one.